The desert stretched wide and endless, a land painted in dry reds and fading golds under the sinking sun. The sky above looked like fire meeting the earth, the horizon glowing orange, as if the day refused to die without a fight. Thomas Hale sat on the worn wooden fence of his ranch, the brim of his hat tilted low, his eyes watching over the herd that grazed lazily. He was a man who had built his life in silence, brick by brick, from sunup to sundown. Never asking for more than the land would give, he had once been surrounded by laughter and company family, neighbors and ranch hands, but now he lived mostly alone. The frontier had a way of pushing people to their limits, and many had left for easier lives in the towns. Thomas stayed. He believed a man was measured by how well he could stand his ground. His ranch was his pride, his land was his partner, his quiet life was his chosen path. That evening, as the shadows grew long, he noticed movement near the distant line of mesquite trees. At first, he thought it might be a stray calf. He narrowed his eyes, holding his breath. The figure staggered toward the ranch, small, thin, and swaying. As it drew closer, he realized it was not an animal, but a girl, dark hair, tangled, clothes torn and dust-stained, bare feet cut and bruised from walking too far. Thomas dropped from the fence and walked toward her, cautious but curious. She stopped a few yards away, her chest rising and falling, as if each breath was a fight. She raised her eyes, and in broken English she whispered, "I can't live without a man. Let me stay." The words hit Thomas like a strange gust of wind. He was not used to anyone asking for shelter, let alone in such a way. His first thought was suspicion. Was she running from something, or was this some kind of trick? But when he looked closer at her face, he saw no deceit. Her dark eyes carried fear and exhaustion. Her body trembled as if it might collapse any second. Without saying much, Thomas reached out and steadied her by the arm. "You look near done in," he said quietly. "Come inside. You need water, maybe food." He brought her into the ranch house, a simple wooden structure that smelled of leather, smoke, and the faint sweetness of cornbread left from the morning. He set a cup of water in her hands, and she drank as though she had crossed a desert with no end. "What's your name?" he asked once she caught her breath. She hesitated, then said, "Ayoka." Her voice was soft, careful, carrying the rhythm of her people's tongue. Thomas nodded. "I'm Thomas Hale. This is my land." For a long time, they sat in silence. Ayoka seemed unsure if she should speak, and Thomas did not press her. But in the quiet, he noticed the way she glanced toward the windows, as if expecting something to appear in the dark. Her shoulders stiffened each time the wind howled. Her hands shook even as she held the cup. Over the next few days, Ayoka stayed. She was shy at first, trying to keep out of his way, but she soon began helping with small chores. She carried water, swept the porch, and tried to feed the chickens, though they clucked and chased her clumsily around the yard. Thomas, watching her struggle, could not help but smile. She was not skilled in ranch life, but she tried with all her heart. The town, however, was less kind. When Thomas brought her with him to buy supplies, whispers followed them. Some saw her as a burden, others as a curiosity. A few gave looks that carried more judgment than words could. Thomas ignored them, but he noticed Ayoka's head lower whenever they passed. She was used to being seen as different, as someone who did not belong. At night, the ranch grew quiet but not peaceful. Strange sounds echoed across the plains. At first, Thomas thought it was coyotes, but the cries were deeper, heavier, carrying a sharp edge that made the horses restless. The cattle pressed close to the fences, their eyes wide in the moonlight. One night, Thomas found Ayoka sitting by the fire, her hands clutching a small necklace carved from bone. She stared into the flames, her lips moving as if in prayer. When he asked what troubled her, she shook her head at first, but later she whispered, "It hunts. I hear it." "What hunts?" Thomas asked. She met his gaze with fearful eyes. "The beast. The shadow beast. My people feared it. Follows." Thomas leaned back, unsure of what to say. He had heard stories of strange creatures in the wild, tales told by travelers to stir fear or wonder. But the way she said it made the air in the room feel heavier. The following evening, The sounds came closer. The wind carried with it a foul smell, something like rotting meat mixed with smoke. Thomas saddled his horse and rode out to check on the herd. The moon hung low and pale, lighting the dry grass in silver. The night felt wrong too still, as if the desert itself held its breath. As he neared the barn, he noticed the cattle were restless, stamping their hooves, their eyes rolling in panic. He dismounted, holding his rifle steady, every sense sharpened. Then he saw it dip along the barn door, 3 long claw marks carved into the wood. Each mark was wider than his hand, gouged deep into the timber. No wolf, no cougar, no bear could leave scars like that. His stomach tightened. He turned slowly, scanning the open land, the shadows stretching far and endless. The air carried a low growl, faint but steady, vibrating like thunder far away. For the first time in years, Thomas Hale felt a chill run through him. He thought of Ayoka's words, the shadow beast, the hunter of her people. He realized now that she had not come to his ranch by chance. She had been running from something that still lingered beyond the horizon. When he returned to the house, Ayoka was waiting, her eyes wide, as if she already knew what he had found. She clutched her necklace, whispering again in her native tongue. Thomas placed his rifle by the door and sat heavily in his chair. The desert was no longer just land to him. It was a place with eyes, watching, waiting. And whatever had left those claw marks was coming closer. The night after Thomas found the claw marks, the ranch felt different. Even the wooden boards of the house seemed to creak under the weight of something unseen. Thomas sat at the table with his rifle close, oil lamp burning low. Across from him, Ayoka whispered prayers in her language, her fingers brushing the small carved necklace that hung against her chest. At last, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. My people called it the shadow beast. It comes when the moon is strong. It hunts families. It hunted mine. Her eyes glistened in the lamp's glow, and Thomas could see her fear was real. It is why I ran. It is why I found you. Thomas leaned back, his jaw tight. He wanted to believe it was only a story, just a way to explain tragedy. But the claw marks on his barn told him otherwise. He thought about leaving, riding with Ayoka far away, but his land was his whole life. Running meant losing everything he had built with his own hands. And as he looked at her small frame, trembling yet refusing to hide, he felt something stir inside him. A man could run, or a man could fight. We'll face it, he said finally. This land is mine, and I won't give it up to any beast. If you stay with me, you'll stand beside me. Can you do that? Ayoka raised her chin. I will not run again. From that moment, their days changed. Thomas prepared the ranch as though a storm was coming. He built stronger fences around the cattle, stacked barrels of water, and laid out lines of oil that could be lit with fire. He sharpened tools, loaded rifles, and tied ropes in ways that might serve as traps. Ayoka helped as best she could. She showed him tricks her people used to track game, how to read prints in the dirt, how to tie bells that rang when something moved in the night, how to mix herbs that masked their scent. Each evening the sounds grew closer. Growls rolled across the land like distant thunder, sometimes so near the cattle nearly stampeded. The horses reared and snorted, eyes flashing white. Thomas barely slept, his hand never far from his rifle. Then the night came when the silence broke. It began with the cattle screaming. Thomas rushed outside, Ayoka at his side, the oil lamp swinging wildly in her hand. The herd crashed against the fences, eyes wide with terror. The ground itself seemed to shake under heavy steps. From beyond the barn, a shadow moved larger than a man, larger than any beast Thomas had ever known. Its eyes burned yellow in the dark. Glowing like fire through fog, the shadow beast stepped into the moonlight, its fur black as coal, long arms ending in claws that gleamed like knives. Its mouth opened in a growl that shook the very air, rows of teeth glistening. Thomas raised his rifle and fired. The sound thundered across the ranch. The bullet struck, but the beast only roared louder, stumbling but not falling. Ayoka lit the oil Thomas had poured along the fence line. Flames leapt up, painting the night in orange. The beast snarled at the fire but did not retreat. Instead, It lunged. The ground trembled as it charged the barn. Thomas fired again, aiming for its chest. Ayoka threw a burning torch at its feet. The flames licked at its fur, and the beast shrieked, thrashing. For a moment, Thomas thought it might turn back, but it did not. It leaped, claws swiping through the wooden beams of the barn as if they were twigs. "Inside," Thomas shouted. He and Ayoka ran for the house, slamming the door shut, pushing heavy boards against it. The beast crashed against the walls, shaking the house on its foundation. Dust rained from the ceiling, dishes fell from shelves, the lamp flickered wildly. Ayoka clutched her necklace, whispering. But then she stood tall, her fear giving way to fire. "We fight, not hide," she said firmly. She grabbed a rope, tied one end to a heavy iron hook, and showed Thomas how it could be used to trap a leg. Together they formed a plan. When the beast circled again, Thomas pushed the door open and fired into the night, drawing its attention. The beast roared and charged. At the last second, Ayoka pulled the rope tight. The creature's leg caught, and it stumbled hard, crashing into the dirt with a cry that shook the desert. "Now," Thomas shouted. He threw burning oil onto its fur, the flames spreading fast. The beast screamed, rolling and thrashing. For a moment, it seemed the fire might be enough. But with one violent twist, it broke free of the rope and fled into the dark, its roar fading into the hills. Silence followed. The cattle trembled, the horses stamped, and smoke hung thick in the air. Thomas lowered his rifle, his chest heaving, sweat running down his face. Ayoka stood beside him, her cheeks streaked with ash, her eyes wide but alive. "We heard it," she whispered. Thomas nodded slowly. "But it's not dead." The days that followed were uneasy. The beast did not return, but its presence lingered in every shadow, in every whisper of wind through the grass. Thomas repaired the barn, tightened the fences, and kept his rifle loaded. Ayoka helped, but something had changed in her. She no longer looked only frightened. She carried herself with quiet strength, moving with purpose, teaching Thomas more of her people's ways. One evening, as the sun set in red fire over the desert, Thomas found her sitting on the porch, gazing at the horizon. She turned to him and said softly, "I came to you because I thought only a man could keep me alive. But I see now. I can fight too. I am not only afraid, I am strong when I stand with you." Her words stirred something deep in Thomas. He realized she had not only sought shelter, she had sought someone who would not run, someone who would face the storm with her. And in standing beside him, she had become more than he ever expected. That night, under a sky filled with stars, the desert seemed different. The land was still wild, still dangerous, but no longer lonely. Thomas knew the shadow beast might return, but he also knew they would not face it as strangers. They were partners now, two souls, bound not by fear, by the choice to fight together. And somewhere in the distance, the beast howled, its cry echoing across the hills. It was still alive, still hunting. But for the first time, Thomas did not feel alone in the dark. Ayoka sat beside him, steady and unafraid, and he understood that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The frontier was not only a place of danger, it was a place where people found courage they did not know they had. For Thomas Hale and Ayoka, that courage was now their bond, their shield, and their hope.